Shalom and welcome to Leraglai, Jewish Ministries, where we teach the Bible from a Jewish historical, cultural, and linguistic perspective. We're continuing in our series in the book of Genesis. This is teaching number 12, and I've titled this teaching The 1 Year Flood. This teaching will focus on Genesis chapter 8. I'd like to begin with a few questions before we get into this teaching. Number one, how long were Noach, his family, and the animals on the ark? Number two, why are many exact dates given in the text of Genesis chapter 8? Number three, what is the significance of the date for the beginning and the end of the flood? Number four, in what manner do we see a fulfillment of the prophecy which Lamech spoke over his son Noach in Genesis 5, verse 29? So hopefully we will find clear answers to all these questions as we go through this teaching. Now, we ended the previous teaching with Noach and his family, together with all the animals, birds, and creatures on the ark. The ark was floating atop of the water, which flooded the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. We then read a status update at the end of Genesis chapter 7. At the very end, verse 24, we read, "And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days." According to the text of Genesis 7, the floodwaters came upon the earth from the skies above and from the springs of the seas beneath in order to totally flood the earth for a period of 40 days and 40 nights. After the surge of floodwaters for 40 days and 40 nights, the earth remained flooded for 150 days. We're actually including from the beginning of the flooding, right? It was for that period of 150 days that the floods were dominant on the earth. In Genesis 8, there was a shift to a decrease in the floodwaters at the marker of 150 days. So let's begin in Genesis 8, verses 1 to 5. Then God remembered Noach and all of the creatures, and all the living creatures, and all of the animals which were with him on the ark. And God caused a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters receded. And he shut up the springs of the deep and the windows of the heavens, and he restrained the rains from the heavens. Then the waters returned from being upon the earth, continually going back. And the waters diminished at the end of 150 days. And the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month. And the waters departed and diminished until the 10th month. On the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains were seen. That's Genesis 8, verses 1 to 5. We read in the first verse, then God remembered Noach. So the obvious question, had God forgotten about Noach and the ark? Of course not. We often read in the scriptures how God remembered a certain person in order to fulfill his word in one way or another. And I just want to read a few examples that we see in the scriptures of times when God remembered. We're going to start in Genesis chapter 19, where we read how God remembered Abraham and rescued his nephew Lot before destroying Sodom and Gomorrah in Genesis 19:29. So it came about when God destroyed the cities of the surrounding area that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the destruction when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So it's interesting in this context because it's saying that God remembered Abraham, but it was for the sake of his nephew Lot, right? And God rescued him out of that place. So again, it's this God fulfilling his word. God remembered Rachel and allowed her to become pregnant after years of infertility. In Genesis 30:22, we read, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. In Exodus, we read how God remembered his covenant and began to move on behalf of his people Israel in order to set them free in Exodus 2:24. So God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Therefore, as we look at all these verses, we can see how God remembers. This phrase is used as he is acting according to his word to fulfill it, right? God enacts his word. He brings it to pass according to his promises. Now, when did God remember Noach and the ark? There is no one time given for when God, quote unquote, remembered. However, there are a few different references to time in these first 5 verses of Genesis 8. Now, I initially thought, as I was preparing this teaching, that the phrase, then God remembered Noach, was referring to the specific time period of the 150-day mark. However, a closer look at the text seems to present a more general time period during the days of the flood. The quote, "Then God remembered Noah," could be referring to the end of the 40 days and 40 nights when the floods came upon the earth, as we read in Genesis 8:2. "And he shut up the springs of the deep and the windows of the heavens, and he restrained the rains from the heavens." Now we know the rains stopped after the initial 40 days and 40 nights that we read back in Genesis 7:12. Now in verse 3, we read how the waters receded. Again, I'll read verse 3. "Then the waters returned from being upon the earth, continually going back, and the waters diminished at the end of 150 days." Now, the Hebrew for the phrase continually going back is haloch veshov, and literally means to go and return or go back and forth. And this is the only time this phrase is used in the Hebrew scriptures. Now, verse 4 tells us where the ark landed, where it says, "And the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat." Now, the word for rested is vatanach, and it comes from the Hebrew verb lanuach, meaning to rest. And this is the same root word as our main character in this account of the flood, and that is Noach, right? His name means rest, as I mentioned earlier in these teachings. Now, the location where the ark rested on the earth speaks of an area, right, on the mountains of Ararat, or in the Hebrew, Hare Ararat. Now, where are the mountains of Ararat located? Now, we'll come back to that in a minute, but the name Ararat is believed to be associated with the ancient Assyrian name Urartu, a kingdom from the 13th century BC, as explained in the Britannica Online Encyclopedia, as I quote here, about Urartu, an ancient country of Southwest Asia centered in the mountainous region southeast of the Black Sea and southwest of the Caspian Sea. Today, the region is divided among Armenia, eastern Turkey, and northwestern Iran. Mentioned in Assyrian sources from the early 13th century BCE, Urartu enjoyed considerable political power in the Middle East in the 9th and 8th centuries BCE. The Urartians were succeeded in the area in the 6th century BCE by the Armenians. So that's a little bit of history of this area known as Urartu, right? So this ancient area is identified here on the screen, and you see the modern countries of Turkey, Iran, and Armenia surrounding it. So the circled area is ancient Urartu, and you see in the center Mount Ararat with the pink arrow pointing to it. So again, Mount Ararat was at the center of this kingdom. Now, the ancient land of Urartu is, once again, the modern day countries of Western Armenia, Eastern Turkey, and northwestern Iran, as you see on your screen. Once again, you see Mount Ararat right there in the center, which today is located in eastern Turkey. It's right on the border of these countries, though, of Iran and Armenia. Now, there are several ancient sources that speak of the flood story and the location of where the ark rested. One of those ancient sources is the Antiquity of the Jews, written by Flavius Josephus in the 1st century AD, about 2,000 years ago. Now, Josephus recounts the flood story. He actually uses a lot from the biblical text, as well as some other resources. And he mentions the location of the ark in the following quote. Josephus says this: "After this, the ark rested on the top of a certain mountain in Armenia." We have to remember that Josephus is writing in that 1st century mindset, right? And at that time, Armenia was a huge nation, a huge kingdom, as we see it here on the map. And to remember that the country of Turkey did not exist at that time. The Ottoman Turks hadn't even come into that area yet. And so we see that the kingdom of Armenia covers this whole area here, which is today eastern Turkey, the current day Armenia, and northwestern Iran. And you see Mount Ararat right in the center, right above the name of the kingdom of Armenia, right? Again, a pink arrow is pointing to it. Now, in the writings of Josephus, he quotes another historian whose name is Nicholas of Damascus, who lived in the previous century, meaning the 1st century BC, about 100 years before Josephus. Now, Nicholas of Damascus was a Greek historian who was a contemporary of Herod the Great. So again, Nicholas of Damascus means his name was Nicholas, and he's from Damascus, right? Damascus, Syria. And again, he was a contemporary of Herod the Great, who also lived in the 1st century BC, right? Yeshua, our Messiah, was born at the end of Herod's reign, right around probably 5 BC. Now, Josephus records the following quote from Nicholas of Damascus regarding the location of where the ark rested. So I'm going to read this quote out of the Antiquity of the Jews, and this is Josephus quoting this other historian, right? So Josephus writes this: "Nay, Nicholas of Damascus, in his 96th book, hath a particular relation about them when he speaks thus," quote, now he's quoting Nicholas of Damascus: "There is a great mountain in Armenia, over Minyas, called Baris, upon which it is reported that many who fled at the time of the deluge," meaning the flood, "were saved, and that one who was carried in an ark came on shore upon the top of it, and that the remains of the timber were a great while preserved. This might be the man who about whom Moses, the legislator of the Jews, wrote," unquote, right? So again, this is Josephus, and he's quoting this man, Nicholas of Damascus, who was a historian in that era, right, about 2,000 years ago. Now, according to Nicholas of Damascus, the ark came to rest on a great mountain in Armenia, and it was called Baris, right, or Baris, I guess is how you say it. Now, why was this mountain called Baris in antiquity 2,000 years ago? We'll actually come back to this at the end of this teaching. Now, the great mountain in Armenia, Mount Baris, is commonly known today as Mount Ararat, and it is located in the region of the mountains of Ararat in modern-day Turkey, right, in eastern Turkey. There are actually two main mountains in this mountainous region of Ararat in Turkey. One is Büyük Ara Dağı, meaning Big Mount Ararat, and the second is Küçük Ara Dağı, meaning Small Mount Ararat. Now we see the two mountains in the photo of the screen. And now Big Mount Ararat has a peak elevation of 16,945 feet, which is 5,165 meters. And Small Ararat has a peak elevation of 12,782 feet, or 3,896 meters. They're both very high mountains. Now, these two mountains are adjacent to each other, and both sit on the Anatolian Plateau, or the Anatolian Plain, which is located about 1,000 meters or 3,300 feet above sea level. So this is, again, I'm talking about the base of the mountains, right, this plateau. So both mountains rise from this plateau, this elevated plain of 1,000 meters or 3,300 feet above sea level. Now, we don't know the exact mountain where the ark rested, only the region, right, as we read, and the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat. However, it seems that it was on the larger mountain, since from what we read in the text, which we'll get to in a little bit. Now, although we don't know exactly where the ark settled on these mountains or in this region, Big and Small Ararat are both large and high mountains, and the base of that mountainous region sits at 1,000 meters, 3,000 feet above sea level. The ark was placed in an elevated area in a mountainous region as the waters continued to recede from the earth. I just want to put this in perspective. I live in Jerusalem, which is in a mountainous region. The apartment I live in Jerusalem, sits at an elevation of 762 meters or 2,500 feet above sea level. The base of the mountains of Ararat are located 250 meters or 800 feet above my location on the mountains of Jerusalem, right? So I'm actually sitting below the base of the mountains that are in Ararat. So just to point out that the flood in the days of Noach was certainly a global flood, right? Because the place where the ark landed was so far elevated above the normal sea level, right? Again, the Jerusalem area would have been covered in water at that time. Now, what was the date when the ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat? We read in verse 4, "And the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month." So it was on the 17th day of the 7th month. So how much time passed from the time the flood started? Exactly 5 months had passed, according to what was recorded in Genesis chapter 7. As we read there, that in the 600th year of the life of Noach, in the second month, on the 17th day of the month. On that day, all the springs of the great deep seas burst forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. Right, so that's Genesis 7:11. So the flood started on the 17th day of the second month, and the ark rested on the mountain on the 17th day of the seventh month. Right, this is 5 months later. Now, according the ancient and biblical calculation of months is based on the moon, which is approximately 29.5 days in each cycle. An average of 30 days per month was the accepted moon cycle in antiquity. That's how most people understood it. They had a general understanding of 30 days per month and 360 days per year, but they knew that wasn't exactly right. Now, 5 months at 30 days per month is or equals 150 days. So from the 17th of the second month until the 17th of the seventh month, the floodwaters dominated the earth for 150 days, right? Which is also equivalent to 5 months. And that's exactly what we read in Genesis 7:24. And the waters prevailed upon the earth 150 days. Now the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat in the seventh month, and then we read of another 150 days which passed as the waters receded from the earth. As we read in Genesis 8:3, then the waters returned from being upon the earth, continually going back, and the waters diminished at the end of 150 days. So during the second set of 150 days, we read in verse 5, and the waters departed and diminished until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains were seen. So we're kind of getting a glimpse into the time period as the waters were receding, right, during that second 150-day period. And this is at on the first of the 10th month is 73 days after the ark rested on the mountain, and the tops of other mountains were then revealed. We then read about the days and months of waiting before they departed from the ark, right before they left the ark, as we continue in Genesis 8, verses 6 to 12. And it happened at the end of 40 days that Noach opened the window of the ark, which he made. Then Noach sent out a raven. It left and went back and forth until the water dried up from being upon the earth. Then he sent out a dove from him to see if the waters decreased from the surface of the earth. But the dove did not find a resting place for the sole of her foot. And she returned to him to the ark, because water was upon the whole surface of the earth. And he stretched out his hand and took her in, and he brought her to himself into the ark. And he waited again for another 7 days, and then sent out the dove again from the ark. And the dove came to him in the evening time, and behold, there was a freshly plucked olive leaf in her mouth. Then Noach knew that the waters had decreased from the earth. Then he waited again for another 7 days, and he sent out the dove, but it did not return to him again. That's Genesis 8, 6 to 12. Now, at the start of these verses, we read that Noach had made a window in the ark. As we read here in Genesis 8, 6, and it happened at the end of 40 days that Noach opened the window of the ark which he made. And this is the first time we read about a window, right? God did not instruct Noach to build a window. And there's probably lots of things that we weren't told, right? Lots of details. But it makes sense that he had different types of windows and doors in the ark, especially on the top part. Now, why did Noach wait 40 days to open the window? Now, the floodwaters were certainly visible when it came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. Even after 150 days of the water receding from the earth, it is possible that the floodwaters were still visible from the ark, since they were located high above the land in a mountainous area. For whatever reason, he waited 40 days. I'm going to share a little bit one theory that I have. Now, there are certain numbers which are repeated in the Bible, and we see a few of them in this text of Genesis 7 and 8. We see several patterns of days in the flood account. I just want to review some of these numbers that keep coming up. So number one, we see how God gave Noach a 7-day warning before sending the flood waters in Genesis 7. Number two, God rained from the heavens and brought the flood waters from the depths of the seas upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Again, that's Genesis 7, 11 to 12. Number three, the flood waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. as we read in Genesis 7:24. Number 4, the ark rested on the mountain after the 150 days and remained there for another 150 days, as we read in Genesis 8:3. Number 5, Noach waited for 40 days and opened the window of the ark to release the raven and the dove. And then we read how the dove returned. And then number 6, Noach waited 7 days and then sent out the second dove. The second dove returned with an olive leaf. And then number 7, Noach waited 7 more days and then sent out the third dove, which did not return. So we see here how the numbers 7, 40, and 150 are repeated in this account of the flood. The number 7 is foundational to the creation account and the pattern for the days of the week, right? Which we still use today. We know that the number 7 is the number of completion and the number of God. The number 7 is used from Genesis to Revelation to speak of significant times and events. The number 40 is uniquely introduced to us in the flood account. Outside of the number 40 being used in the age of Cain when he was 850 years old in Genesis 5:13, the first time we see the number 40 by itself is here in Genesis chapter 7, verse 4, speaking of the 40 days and 40 nights. Now, the number 40 is used for the number of days that the flood waters came upon the earth. The number 40 is then used again in the initial waiting period of Noach as the waters were receding from the earth, as we read in Genesis 8:6. And it happened at the end of 40 days that Noach opened the window of the ark, which he made. Now, why did Noach wait 40 days before opening the window to send out the birds? There's no reason given as to why Noach waited 40 days. However, it appears that Noach was imitating God. God gave Noach a 7-day warning before flooding the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Noach waited for 40 days before opening the window of the ark and then waited for 2 sets of 7 days to test the conditions of the earth by sending out the birds. The number 40 plays a significant role in the Bible. And I'd like to just take a few minutes here and just review some of the major things that we read about in the scriptures that contain the number 40. So number 1, Jacob's body after he died was prepared for embalming for 40 days, as we read in Genesis 50. Number 2, twice Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days and 40 nights, as we read in Exodus 24 and 34. Number 3, the 12 spies spied out the promised land for 40 days. In Numbers 13. Number 4, there were 40 years of wandering for the Israelites in the desert because of their disobedience, as we read in Numbers 14:34. Number 5, Eli the priest judged Israel for 40 years, as we read in 1 Samuel 4. Number 6, Goliath taunted the armies of Israel for 40 days, as we read in 1 Samuel 17:16. Number 7, King David reigned as king of Israel for 40 years. Number 8, King Solomon reigned as king of Israel for 40 years. Number 9, Elijah the prophet journeyed 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Horeb, right, the mountain of God in 1 Kings 19. Number 10, Jonah prophesied that Nineveh would be destroyed in 40 days, as we read in Jonah chapter 3. Number 11, Yeshua fasted 40 days and 40 nights at the start of his earthly ministry, as we read in Matthew 4. And number 12, Yeshua appeared on the earth for 40 days after his resurrection at the end of his earthly ministry, and then he ascended to heaven, as we read it in Acts 1. The number 40 plays a significant role in the Bible. It is used as a time of judgment, a time of fulfillment, and as a time of completion. Just to reemphasize, 40 days mark the beginning and the end of Yeshua's earthly ministry. And 40 days mark the beginning and the end of the floodwaters on the earth in the days of Noah. It's just interesting to see how these things correspond. It is helpful to see the significance of the number 40 in the Bible and to understand how God works through patterns of time in this world and in our lives. Right? It's good to understand the significance of these numbers as we're reading the scriptures, and also to be thinking about them in our day-to-day lives and how God still uses them. Now, in the next section of Genesis 8, God tells Noach to leave the ark, and God gives us the exact date. So let's continue in Genesis 8, verses 13 to 17. And it happened in the 601st year, on the first day of the first month, the waters dried up from being upon the earth. Then Noach removed the cover from the ark, Then he saw, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. Then in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried up. Then God spoke to Noach, saying, Go out from the ark, you and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you all living things that are with you of all flesh, from fowl to animal, and every creeping thing that crawls upon the earth, that they will swarm upon the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. Now, in verse 13, we read the date for when the earth returned again to a dry state. It says it was the first day of the first month of Noach's 601st year of life, right? So that was like a New Year's Day. Now, this was approximately 10 and a half months after the flood began, or 315 days. The flood began on the 17th of the second month of Noach's 600th year of life. Even though we read that the earth was dry on New Year's Day of the 601st year of Noach's life, they did not leave the ark. Noach and the family stayed in the ark for nearly another 2 months. So why did they stay in the ark for nearly 2 months after they already knew that the earth was dried up? We're never told directly in the text. However, it's possible that they became comfortable in the ark and they were not ready to leave. Maybe they were just waiting for the voice of the Lord to tell them it was now time to depart from the ark, just as the Lord had spoken to Noach 1 year earlier to enter the ark. From a practical point of view, even though the land was dried up, it would take time for vegetation to grow on the earth again and be sufficient for Noach and for all the animals to be ready to eat. Now, whatever the exact reason, God officially gave the word to leave the ark on a specific day, as we read in Genesis 8:14-16. Then the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dried up. Then God spoke to Noach, saying, Go out from the ark, you and your wife and your sons' wives, and your sons' wives with you. So again, we read about the specific date, right? The 27th day of the second month. So what is significant about this date? The flood started on the 17th day of the second month, 1 year earlier, right, on Noach's 600th year. And then God called them to leave the ark on the 27th day of the second month in the 601st year of Noach's life. So this is exactly 1 year and 10 or 11 days after the flood began, according to the lunar calendar. I just mentioned 10 or 11 because 1 year from the 17th day of the second month to the 16th day of the second month would have been 1 year, right? But it's the 17th to the 17th, and then there's another either 10 or 11 days, depending on how you're counting it. Now, although each month is averaged to be 30 days, according to the lunar calendar, it's literally, I should say, 29 days, 12 hours, and 44 minutes. A lunar year of 12 months is 354 days and 8.8 hours, or a total of 355 days, right? Because you have an extra part of the day there. Now, the series of days recorded for the flood account, as we read them in Genesis 7 and 8, is 150 plus 150 plus 40 plus 7 plus 7, which equals 354 days, which is the full number, right, of the lunar calendar, 354 days and 8 hours. So it's interesting, just to mention that first 150 days is when the waters were increasing on the earth, and that includes that initial 40 days, right? So we see 150 plus 150 plus 40 plus 7 plus 7 is 354 days. Now, a complete year according to the sun and the solar system is 365 and a quarter days. Now, a full lunar year of 355 days plus an additional 10 days would complete the solar year of 365 days. So it's interesting as we see both of these calculations in the flood account in Genesis 7 and 8. So putting all of these dates together from the flood, it appears that God brought Noach and the others out of the ark exactly 1 solar year, 365 days from the time that the flood started, right? Because it was that 1 lunar year plus the 10 or 11 days equals 365 days. Now, this dating of the days and years fits exactly as God designated it designated it at creation back in Genesis 1, where we read, and God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to make a separation between the day and between the night, and let them be for signs and for appointed times and for days and for years. Right? This is Genesis 1:14. The sun and moon were the two great lights in the heavens, and they give us a proper understanding of how to count days, months, and years. Again, one solar year is 365 days, and 1 year also equals 12 lunar months plus 10 to 11 days, right? So it's that 354 plus 11 or 355 plus 10. And we see all these numbers in the flood account. And I believe that God used the timing of the flood to teach Noach and future generations the days in a year, both the lunar calendar and the solar calendar, right? It was a total of 365 days that the flood was on the earth and that they were in the ark. And we also see that 355 plus the 10 days. So we see that in the two different calculations for the lunar and solar years. Now, in the final verses of Genesis 8, we read Noach's first acts after leaving the ark, and then how God responded to what Noah had done, right? So let's read Genesis 8, verses 18 to 22. Then Noach went out, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him. All of the animals, all of the creeping things, and all of the birds, everything that moves upon the earth, according to their families, went out from the ark. Then Noach built an altar to the Lord, and he took from all of the clean animals and from all of the clean birds, and offered them as burnt offerings on the altar. Then the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, and the Lord said to his heart, I will not again curse any more the ground on the account of man, because the imagination of the heart of man is wicked from his youth, and neither will I any more kill again every living thing as I have done. Furthermore, all the days of the earth, sowing and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter, the day and the night will not cease. Now, the first thing that Noach did after leaving the ark was that he built an altar to the Lord. Noach then offered burnt offerings on the altar to the Lord from the clean animals and the clean birds. These sacrifices were pleasing to the Lord, as we read in Genesis 8:21. These offerings are in keeping with what God expected from mankind from the very beginning, to bring first fruits to the Lord, just as Abel had done in Genesis 4. The Lord then responded to Noach's offerings by making a series of promises. I just want to read again Genesis 8:21, the second part, and the final verse, verse 22. And the Lord said to his heart, I will not again curse any more the ground on the account of man, because the imagination of the heart of man is wicked from his youth. And neither will I any more kill again every living thing as I have done. Furthermore, all the days of the earth, sowing and harvest and cold and heat and summer and winter and day and night will not cease. Now, God's response to Noach's offerings was a promise to not curse the ground again and to not destroy all of humanity in the same manner as he did by destroying it with the flood. It is interesting to see how the Lord tells us what he said to himself at that time, as we read, quote, the Lord said to his heart. And it's beautiful to see this because it's recorded in the scriptures. More than likely, this is the Lord's account of what happened at that time as he gave it to Moses, right? Because Moses, we believe, recorded the Torah, right? The first 5 books. And the Lord tells us what he was thinking to himself, what he said to himself. The Lord said to his heart. It's such beautiful wording. And then we read those first words as we see them here in Hebrew. Lo osif lekalel od et ha'adama ba'avur ha'adam. I will not again curse anymore the ground on the account of man. Now, the word for curse here is lekalel, meaning to make light of, to dishonor, or to curse. In Genesis 3, where we read about that original curse, right, we read a different word for curse when God cursed the ground after the original sin. So I just want to read Genesis 3:17. And to Adam he said, because you listened to the voice of your woman and ate from the tree which I commanded you, saying, do not eat from it. Cursed is the ground on account of you. In pain you will eat of it all the days of your life. So again, this is Genesis 3:17. Now the Hebrew word for cursed is arura, from the root word arar, meaning to curse. Now we see a connection of these two different words for curse, right? Like Kalel and Arar, in what God spoke to Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. I'm going to read verse 3. We're all familiar with this verse, but just to make this connection, God said, "And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed," right? So this is God's word to Abraham a few chapters later. I just want to point out here, as they're color-coded on your screen, the light blue word for curse in the Hebrew is lekalel, just like we see in Genesis 8. And the second word for curse in purple there, or pink, is arar, just like we see in Genesis 3. And so it's interesting as we see it here in Genesis 12:3, how these two words for curse are used synonymously, right, as synonyms. And so we basically understand that we can understand both those words to mean the same thing. Now, at the start of this teaching, I asked, in what manner do we see a fulfillment of the prophecy which Lamech spoke over his son Noach in Genesis 5? So clearly here, after the flood, God promised to never curse the ground of the earth again by destroying all flesh on account of man's sin by bringing a flood of water upon it. The promise of God, this promise of God, is the first part of the fulfillment of the prophecy spoken over Noach's life by his father Lamech. And just going back to what it says in Genesis 5:29, where Lamech spoke this word, and he called his name Noach, saying, "This one will give us rest from our works and from the hardship of our hands, from the ground which the Lord has cursed." The Lord promised to not curse the ground again. Now, this is the beginning of this fulfillment of the prophecy over Noach, and we're going to see a further fulfillment of this prophecy in the next chapter. So we'll continue with this when we get into Genesis chapter 9. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we read in the writings of Josephus that the ancient name Mount Baris is used for the location of where the ark rested. Now, although there is little known about this ancient name for Ararat, there may be an answer in the Turkish language. This is just my opinion, my understanding. There's a word in Turkish which is written barish, pronounced as I've written there, barish, right? Now, this Turkish word barish means peace. Naming the mountain where the ark rested the mountain of peace, Mount Barish, makes sense, and the Turkish word may be adopted from an ancient language, right? So the words are very close, Baris and Barish, and a lot of times in the Middle Eastern world, there's kind of word sharing. We see this a lot with Greek and Hebrew and Arabic and different languages here in the Middle East. And so very likely it could have had been borrowed from another language, and this could be the meaning of this word when it talks about Mount Barish. Now, it was on this mountain where the ark landed that Noach offered sacrifices to the Lord. The Lord accepted these offerings, right, as a pleasing aroma, and the Lord promised to never again destroy all flesh as he had done. There was peace on the mountain between God and his creation after the flood. I just want to mention one other thing. In Isaiah 54, we read how God compared his favor and peace to Israel, actually the covenant of peace with Israel, with the promise he made in the days of Noach. So I'm just going to read two verses, Isaiah 54, verses 9 and 10. This is God speaking to Israel, right, as a nation. And the Lord said this, "For this is like the days of Noach to me, when I swore that the waters of Noach would not flood the earth again. So I have sworn that I will not be angry with you, nor rebuke you, for the mountains may be removed, and the hills may shake, but my favor will not be removed from you, nor will my covenant of peace be shaken, says the Lord who has compassion on you." Isaiah 54, verses 9 and 10. Beautiful promise, right? So God's covenant of peace with Israel is used in the context of God's promise that he would never destroy all flesh by the flood again, as in the days of Noah. And he has been faithful to keep his promise. So this is the conclusion to this teaching on Genesis chapter 8, the 1-year flood. Hopefully we've answered all of our questions adequately. Here's some of the resources I used in my preparation for this teaching. As always, please feel free to share this teaching with others. I also want to invite you to partner with us. Leraglai is a nonprofit organization, and we're totally dependent on donations from viewers like yourself. And you can do so by going to our website, leraglai.com, and click the Give tab there. I also want to invite you to subscribe to our weekly emails if you're not already receiving them. And again, you can do so on our website, Leraglai.com, or you can simply scan the QR code on your screen. And once you get to the website, simply click the Give or Subscribe tabs as needed. Thank you so much for watching, and God willing, see you again next time.